From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. For 3 weeks now, we've been following this rare executive branch dispute involving the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Mental Health, and Governor Kay Ivey's office. This week, there seems to be some resolution. After meeting with the governor on Monday, Veterans Affairs Commissioner Kent Davis announced that he will resign his post effective December 31st. Ivey had asked Davis to resign last week after a messy interagency dispute that involved a leaked ethics complaint and accusations of mishandling federal grant applications that could have jeopardized the state's ability to use American Rescue Plan Act funds. Davis had initially refused to resign, but changed course Monday before a special called meeting of the Veterans Affairs Board to consider his status. Ivey called the meeting respectful, frank, and informative. She said, quote, "I appreciate Commissioner Davis's record of service as commissioner, and I appreciate him for doing the right thing for our state and the future of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. As I have said before, we have important work to continue doing, and I want to see nothing get in the way of us remaining focused on the thing that truly matters here, improving veterans' care," end quote. Davis released a video statement saying it was not an easy decision to resign, but the best one under the circumstances.
I will step down as the Commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs at the end of this year. This was not an easy decision, but I am convinced that my decision was the best one given my recent health concerns, the long-term mission of the ADVA, and most importantly, for the outstanding military veterans of Alabama. I remain very proud of the great work and propriety that the ADVA team has accomplished over the past nearly 6 years of my tenure as commissioner. Governor Ivey summed it up best yesterday when she spoke of the challenges of fulfilling our respective roles, and I'm very grateful for the great discussion we had on Monday. My time as commissioner has been some of the best years of my civilian career. The best part was meeting the men and women who have served and the families who sacrificed for the freedoms we have. I am grateful to have had this opportunity. And yet, as I reflect on my nearly 6 years as commissioner, I also acknowledge that more work is needed. There are always new and constructive ways to support Alabama's veterans. I look forward to completing this year with that goal in mind, and I will continue to apply the same passion and purpose for the next few months that has become expected.
One major reason why Davis wanted to remain on through the end of the year was to complete the department's long-term project of building a new veterans nursing home in Enterprise. The ribbon cutting on the new Command Sergeant Benny Atkins State Veterans Home took place this week and featured a huge crowd of veterans and local and state leaders.
So today is the culmination of about 7 years of work, and during the ceremony we talked about partnership amongst local, state, federal, and private sector, especially the nonprofit community, to make this event happen. So we opened the doors after 7 years, and we will have 174 beds providing long-term care for the state's veterans in this facility. We knew we needed to build a new state veterans home when we started this process, and it's a part of the Division of Labor. Our partners, the federal VA, they're largely in charge of short-term medical care veterans through their great hospitals and outpatient clinics and vet centers. And the states are proud to contribute through the State Veterans Home with long-term care of veterans. So we're really proud to open the doors of this facility and meet some of the pent-up demand for long-term care for veterans in Alabama.
Of course, this week marked the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. At the state capitol, a new update to the state's Fallen Heroes Memorial was unveiled. The memorial was erected in 2007 to honor all those who have died in service to their country since the War on Terror began in 2001. The memorial is located in the old Supreme Court chamber and has become a prominent part of Capitol tours. The memorial was updated to include Marine Sergeant Amanda Brazil, who died in Iraq in 2021 while on Marine security guard duty.
The Alabama Fallen Heroes Memorial, it represents a focal point for remembrance of the sacrifices made by so many. It is a commemorative object intended to remind us of the people who served in and died as a result of war. It honors the lives and the legacies of those we've lost and provides comfort, solace, and inspiration for those who visit this sacred spot. This memorial provides a place to share stories like we've done today and learn parts of the lives of other service members and things that we did not know, and the positive impact that just one person can make on the lives of so many.
This week, many of the state's top political and business leaders gathered in Point Clear for Manufacture Alabama's annual conference. I was able to attend part of the conference, and I moderated a panel discussion on economic development featuring House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter, State Senator Garland Gudger, and Secretary of Commerce Ellen McNair. Jeff Sanders was with me in Point Clear and has that story.
Capitol Journal's Todd Stacy interviewed Speaker of the House Nathaniel Ledbetter, State Senator Garland Gudger, and Secretary of the Department of Commerce Ellen McNair. They discussed the state government's recent efforts to attract new business and strengthen Alabama's workforce.
If we find something in talking to industry, whether it's BCA, a manufacturer, or some of the business side, and they say, we really believe if we do this or this, we can improve our workforce participation. I think we got to seriously look at that.
The panelists agreed that the child care tax credit enacted by lawmakers in the most recent legislative session will greatly enhance workforce participation.
That is a piece of legislation that if people want to come back into the workforce, that a licensed daycare gets a stipend so that a single mother, single father can get back into the workforce instead of spending 2/3 of their paycheck every week, every month, every bi-monthly, back to the child daycare center instead of to themselves so they can put diapers and food on the table.
Secretary McNair emphasized the critical role of the Commerce Department in engaging with local communities and equipping leaders with the tools they need to attract new industries and create jobs.
Those local leaders, the mayors, the county commissioners, the business leaders in those communities, that we are here to support their efforts and to be able to incentivize and close deals for them.
According to Speaker Ledbetter, a crucial factor in attracting new industries was the passage of Governor Ivey's game plan, which introduced a range of new economic incentives.
If we find something in talking to industry, whether it's BCA, a manufacturer, or some of the business side, and they say, we really believe if we do this or this, we can improve our workforce participation. I think we got to seriously look at that.
We want to make sure that we're known as a legislature for any industry that is listening, paying attention, and then if you need something, we'll try to jump on that so that it changes the way that you're doing business for the betterment of the state of Alabama.
And being proactive to the needs of industry is something all the panelists agree is critical to the future growth of the state's economy. Reporting from the Manufacture Alabama annual meeting in Point Clear, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
You may remember that Senator Gudger was in a bad jet ski accident back in July that left him in critical condition. This was his first public appearance since that accident. We caught up with him to see how his recovery is going. He said his progress is an answer to many prayers.
I'm very grateful anyway, and I'm blessed. I mean, if you've had a near-death experience, in which I've never had one until 3 months ago, it changes the way you think about things, and the way your goals are, what's important to you. And I think it's been a positive thing since I'm on this side of it. But when you go through it, there was so much pain involved, just physical pain. And then coming through out of that, it's just, changed my physical physique and everything else. So I'm blessed to be here. I'm blessed to be back. I'm blessed not to be paralyzed or obviously dead. And so I just count my blessings more than anything else right now. And I'm spending time with my wife more. I'm spending time with my children more. And that's really what it's all about. When I'm on my deathbed and I've thought about this through this process, I'm not going to really worry about my bank account. I'm not going to worry about what I've made and what I've bought over the years. It's really going to matter, did I instill what I needed to instill in my children, and does my wife know I love her? And so it changes, and we know that. It's just the fact of, are we really doing that? And this was a way I think that God pulled me back in and said, hey, let's realign and focus.
Certainly happy to see Senator Gudger doing so well. First Lady Jill Biden and Secretary of State Lloyd Austin paid a visit to Montgomery this week They came to Maxwell Air Force Base, where they toured an on-base school to highlight programs that the Biden administration is rolling out to offer more military families access to high-quality pre-K.
So if we want kids to succeed in school and their careers, if we want to set them on a lifelong path for learning, we need to invest in them from the very beginning. We're here today to celebrate something big. Military kids at Maxwell Air Force Base and at 80 military schools across the country and abroad now have access to full-day pre-kindergarten. Thank you. To the military families here today, Joe and I know that your commitment to this country never wavers, and you deserve that same devotion from your Commander-in-Chief. The President and I stand with you today and all the days ahead.
Last week's deadly school shooting in Georgia brought a numbing shock to a nation that has become all too familiar with such tragic violence. This week in the capital city, there were some disturbing reverberations. Multiple schools received online threats of violence, leading to the arrest of 7 juveniles. It has parents, teachers, and administrators again focused on school security and keeping students safe. Randy Scott has that story.
Montgomery's Percy Julian High School is buzzing with activity, but it's been a smooth day with no incidents. School officials, state leaders, and concerned parents are paying close attention to local schools due to online threats posted earlier this week. Threats to do damage that could harm students and staff. It's a thought state leaders want to see stopped.
Yes, we lost 4 people over there, but the reactions were much quicker and much more thorough. I think everybody is much more prepared and able to deal with these issues. I just wish they'd stop.
Also keeping watch of these threats are law enforcement officers and agencies such as Central Alabama Crime Stoppers working with them to fight crime.
If a student is at school and they realize something is going on that may be dangerous to the other students or the staff, they'll call our 334-215-STOP number, or they'll download our P3 Tips app.
Tony Garrett is the executive director of Central Alabama Crime Stoppers and says school safety is important.
We have a tip program or a reward program in the school system where if any student sees a gun or finds a gun on school property, including school events, such as a football game or a basketball game, we'll give that student $500, no questions asked.
Well, the recent school shooting in Georgia, followed up by online messages threatening schools here in this state, has law enforcement officials on edge, but they want to do what they can to make sure these buildings are kept safe, along with the people inside them, the staff and the students. Garrett says with help from concerned citizens, threats like these will be handled quickly and the people responsible will be punished. A painful lesson for some to learn.
But it all depends on the judge that they get and the type of charges that they're actually being charged with. Because you could be looking at some detention time, could be looking for some fines that the parents are going to have to pay, and you could be looking at a full suspension, being kicked out of the school system.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capital Journal.
When we come back, I'll be joined by Montgomery District Attorney Daryl Bailey and Trisha Melberg-Cater, the new Executive Director of the Alabama District Attorneys Association, for a discussion about crime and how prosecutors are funded in Alabama. After that, Alabama Appleseed Research Director Leah Nelson and UAB Professor Peter Jones join me to talk about their report showing the disparate way victims of crime are compensated via restitution. And later in the show, Othni Lathram, Director of the Legislative Services Agency, is in studio to talk about the latest progress with the new State House being constructed next door. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next are Montgomery County District Attorney Daryl Bailey and Trisha Melberg, Executive Director of the Alabama District Attorneys Association. Friends, welcome to Capital Journal.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Bailey, let me start with you. You're part of this crime task force unit here in the capital city. I talked to the Attorney General about it. I know that Leah is involved, the Sheriff's Office, Police Department. Sounds like y'all have already got some pretty good results coming out of this thing. What can you say about this task force, and is it something that could be replicated statewide to deal with this crime problem?
Well, I think it could be replicated statewide, and it's going really good. You know, what they are doing is they are helping with a lot of things that unfortunately the Montgomery Police Department doesn't have the personnel to cover right now. So it's just law enforcement coming together, helping each other, a coordinated effort. They're doing a lot of traffic enforcement, which unfortunately we just didn't have a lot of traffic enforcement in Montgomery and prior to this. And what that does is it helps in a lot of ways. You know, people, when I say traffic enforcement, oh, they're out there writing tickets, and that's not really the purpose. I mean, you won't believe the number of traffic homicides we have just because people are speeding, running red lights, that type of thing. But when you do traffic enforcement, it also helps investigate with crimes. I mean, you find drugs, stolen property, stolen cars, stolen guns, all kinds of things in these cars. You find people who are on, who have warrants out for their arrests or who have probation revocations. So a lot of those things have helped, and you know, really, it's helping us with a lot of the smaller crimes, and it relieves us and the Montgomery Police Department to focus on the murders and capital murders and robberies and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trisha, let me say, first of all, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Relatively new in this role, replacing Barry Matson, who was there for a while.
Yes.
But you've been at the association for a while. Talk about the association, its role in the state, and again, how maybe something like this that's used in Montgomery can be applied statewide.
Okay, so when you're talking about the District Attorneys Association, we have two parts. We've got the Office of Prosecution Services too, and we provide resources for the District Attorneys Association. And the District Attorneys Association, in turn, we do training for prosecutors throughout the state. We do training for law enforcement. We also provide resources that the prosecutors can use to help them with their everyday activities. You know, the association also provides services, for example, our HERO program, where we provide service-trained facility dogs to accompany the district attorneys into the court process to work with their victims. So there's a lot that the association does. The association also looks at legislation, and we're, you know, very fortunate that all of our members are actively involved, and they also suggest legislation, and it's a great organization.
I want to talk about funding. Y'all are a general fund agency, so to speak, but you also have a lot of local money, fines, fees, court fees, things like that, federal money, some of that. Everybody in the general fund seems, you know, cash-strapped a little bit, but y'all are interesting in terms of prosecutors because so much of your funding comes from, I want to call it like a user fee type thing. I was surprised to learn recently that, I guess going back to the 70s and 80s, so much of the prosecutors' budget was based on bad checks, which was probably a cash cow in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but not so much anymore. So how does that impact your, you know, your local prosecutor's office, thinking about, you know, just the level of being funded?
Well, and you're exactly right. Back in the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, bad check fees funded our offices appropriately. We didn't really have any funding issues because unfortunately there were a lot of people writing bad checks. But what happened is obviously when checks went away, and I mean they're almost totally gone now. Yeah. I mean, I don't even have a checkbook anymore, and I think most people don't, is that funding went away. And I don't, you know, nobody was really prepared for that. And so to try to fix that, there's been some fees added to different things like bail bond fees, for example, but those have never adequately taken the place of what we were receiving with the bad check fees. And what that means is people were cut. I mean, our staff levels are lower in some instances than they were in the 80s and the 90s. And as you can imagine, crime is not lower. Crime has grown. The more complexity of our job has grown and got more complex and that type of thing. So, and we're having to deal with a lot more with a lot less resources. So funding is a huge issue with district attorneys. And again, that's not just a Montgomery or Alabama issue, that is a nationwide issue. We deal with that at the National District Attorneys Association. Funding for DA's offices across this nation is a critical issue.
Yeah, and look, we're a low tax, low service state. I think we can stipulate that. But it matters how you go about funding things. And if everything is based on fees and fines, then that's almost like a perverse incentive. Not that everybody's going to do the wrong thing, but if you're counting on fines and fees to make your budget, then you've got an unspoken incentive to do all that. So is there a better way to fund prosecutors? Is anybody doing this a different way that maybe we could emulate?
So when you're looking at the collection of fines and fees across the state, they're only collected at about 20%. So that's 20 cents on every dollar.
Just because people don't pay?
Just because people don't pay. So when you're looking at the court cost fines and fees, that's one thing that we're going to explore and that we're talking to different members of the legislature about now, is how can we fund district attorneys' offices better so that district attorneys' offices don't have to rely on some of those funds and fees. And in fact, there was a study recently that came out of Jefferson County, and our district attorney in Jefferson County, Danny Carr, even mentioned that our district attorneys don't want to be collection agencies. They want to be able to do the jobs that they were put in office to do, which is, of course, combat crime and keep their community safe.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, if you're always wondering and that's a great point, because if you're, so much of that fine or fee or whatever it is doesn't get paid, and so how do you go about budgeting? I mean, you do this at the local level all the time, so I imagine just every local district attorney has to go through the same budget process.
Yeah, it's very difficult because what you're relying on criminals to fund the criminal justice system. It's a horrible way for that to happen. And as Trisha said, the collections are only 20%, but I want people to know that is because the judge's hands in a lot of these cases are tied. I mean, they can't put people in jail for failing to pay now. I mean, that's pretty explicit with the law. So, what they're left with is really just, bringing people in and putting them on payment plans. I mean, I've seen people paying as little as $5, $10 a month. And that's just no way to fund the criminal justice system with those type of fees. We do everything that we can to make sure people pay what they're supposed to, especially to the victims of crime, because, goodness, now with, nobody really going to prison anymore on nonviolent cases. That's all the victim has is to be able to get their restitution. So we do try to prioritize that, making sure that they get the money at least that they're owed because of the crime that was committed against them. But after that, trying to get money to fund our offices is just not a wise way to fund DA's offices.
Yeah, interesting you bring that up, because in the next segment we're going to be talking with some folks that did a report on the victims and they're making sure that they get compensated and things like that. Well, what's a solution? Is it a bigger line item in the general fund budget? I mean, it's tough to come to the legislature and ask for more money. Everybody knows that. But is that the solution to get, hey, let's do this through the general fund and not have everybody fighting over fines and fees to fund their office? Is that the way to do it?
And that's one of the things that we're looking at, and that's something that we have been speaking with the different legislators with and leadership. And the legislature and the budget chairs and leadership have been great to help the district attorneys in the past. And we're going to continue to talk with them and work through that to see if there are ways that we can increase our funding through the general fund.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something we're definitely going to follow, because I think everybody wants to count on their local law enforcement to absolutely include prosecutors being there, being funded, being reliable, and that's something we all want just as citizens. Let me go to other legislative priorities, because we talk about teachers, we talk about prison guards a lot these days. A lot of different, state professions are focused on recruiting. Hey, we got to find more teachers. We got to find more prison guards. Well, y'all are interesting as a profession because it's lawyers, right? You got to have a law degree. You've got to, pursue that. There's a lot of competition for that. So how is recruiting going for local prosecutors, understanding that there's a lot of competition for young attorneys?
I've been doing this for 27 years, and it's the worst I've ever seen. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, well, I can just tell you, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have a stack of resumes on my desk, and we would be able to choose the best and the brightest out of that stack. Right now, I have 0. And talking to not only prosecutors across the state, but I talk with prosecutors across this country with the National District Attorneys Association, it's the exact same. We're not getting the resumes that we once did. And there's several reasons for that. One is there is a lot more competition. For example, in Montgomery, I have to deal with every state agency. Every state agency has an attorney. You have the Attorney General's office, who has the same problem in trying to attract and keep attorneys. You have the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and you have any big law firm has a headquarters in Montgomery, any big law firm in the state of Alabama. So we deal with all that. Law schools across the country are seeing less people going to law school, and that has contributed to it. There's also a narrative across this country of trying to persuade people not to become prosecutors, and we're fighting that as well. So all of those things combined have led to us, not being able to recruit the people that we need to recruit. We are enacting things to change that through our association.
Okay.
We're getting more involved with the law schools, as soon as students come in. This past summer, I hired 13 law clerks. And we're not able to pay them a lot of money, but in their first year of law school, they're eager to just come in and get the experience.
Sure.
And so we try to convince them that what we do is noble work, and that it's more. There's some things more important than just your salary at the end of the day. And believe it or not, we do a good job of convincing these young attorneys or these young law school students that. And if we're able to get them into our offices, we're usually able to get them to come to work for us once they graduate.
You got to believe it, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be part of what, you just really want to do that work, right? I'm assuming that's a big part of the draw.
Yeah, we've turned into recruiters is what we have. I mean, I do a lot of my time during the work week is spent recruiting. I feel like a football coach almost, in NIL or something like that. But you have to. I mean, we have to cultivate those relationships not only with the law schools, but with the law school students. We've helped Faulkner Law School here in Montgomery, which is a great law school, with their they have a future prosecutors program, and we provide them speakers and support through there. So we're doing all those things to try to help ease the situation, but it's very dire. For the first time in my career, I've had to turn to recruiting services to help us recruit attorneys to come into our office.
That's interesting. Well, it kind of all comes back to resources too, because I'm guessing you're capped a little bit in terms of salary and things like that compared to big-time law firms, compared to state agencies and things like that. So we're going to be hearing a lot about crime in this upcoming session. I keep hearing it from Republicans and Democrats, legislative leadership, that crime is going to be a big legislative priority. But whatever laws get passed, whatever policies might get passed, funding and properly resourcing prosecutors has got to be a big part of that equation. Are y'all planning to be a part of that conversation?
Oh, definitely. And we're very appreciative. Governor Ivey, Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth, the Speaker, the Pro Tem, they have taken crime and what's been happening in our communities very serious. And we've actually had some of the leadership, we've had some other legislators reach out to us to provide them with our thoughts and some ideas on how they can combat this crime problem that we've got. And so we're very appreciative to them for that, and we definitely look forward to continuing working with them on that for this next upcoming session.
All right, well, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on Capitol Journal. We'll be following up with you, especially on the recruitment issue as we go forward. Thanks again.
Thank
you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next are Leah Nelson of Alabama Appleseed and Peter Jones, Professor of Public Administration at UAB. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I really wanted to dive deep into this report that y'all really teamed up on. And Leah, you took the lead in terms of publishing this. We published it in Alabama Daily News about fines and fees, how maybe there's a disparate impact on really a disbursement and how these things go about. Can you walk me through what the report said and really how this came about?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So over the last 6 or 7 years, I've done a lot of work to try to understand what happens to people who owe fines and fees. So that's people who are adjudicated guilty of anything from a traffic offense to a felony and owe money as part of their sentence. And what I've documented over that time as part of Alabama Appleseed is that people who owe this money go to great lengths to pay it and suffer really harsh consequences. Sometimes they're jailed. A lot of times they, give up basic necessities. We talked a lot, and you and I have talked in the past about driver's license suspensions as a result of unpaid debt, and that's something the legislature took care of last year, which is fantastic. What we were hoping to do with this work, though, is look at what happens to the people who are owed this money. Because as much as I knew about what was going on with people who owed it, I also knew that a lot of them weren't paying, which means that someone is owed money and is not getting it. So what we did, and what we've been working on since 2020 with the Jefferson County and Birmingham Division judges, is looking sort of under the hood of the data to understand what happens once people pay money. Where does it go? Who's getting it? How much money are we even talking about? And just trying to put together a picture of the fines and fees system, not just as a criminal justice issue, but also as a public finance issue.
Okay, so if I, have a traffic fine or some kind of violation, I pay into the system. Where does that money go? Based on your research in Jefferson County, where does that money go in terms of percentages and all that?
Well, it goes all over the place. And I should say in Jefferson County, thanks to the judges there who worked with AOC, we were able to look at about 24,000 cases, mostly misdemeanors and felonies. We didn't get traffic data.
Okay.
But what we learned is that money that's paid in is allocated according to a priority system that's built into the software that clerks and AOC use to distribute money once it comes in.
You're talking about the Administrative Office of the Courts.
That's correct.
Right.
So AOC has a software system. It's called the State Judicial Information System, and all of the unified courts, so that's all district and circuit courts, use that to track money once it comes in. So the clerk receives a check from you because you are on a $25 a month payment plan. You send $25, she enters that into the system, and then what happens to that money is determined by this default priority system that's been built up over decades into this software to decide where the money goes. And the system picks winners and losers, and that's something that we were really surprised about. So I went into this, and I think a lot of the people that we were working with, including judges, went into this thinking that the money was probably distributed on a pro rata basis. So let's say your total fine is $1,000, you pay $100. We thought that $10 would go to each of the different funds that are supposed to receive that money. That turns out not to be the case. Instead, if you owed $100 to priority number one, then that is the only fund that would receive any money, and the rest wouldn't get any money until you paid the $101st. It's called a cascade system. So what that means in practice is that funds that are lower in priority don't get money until the first is fully satisfied.
So what is that first one?
if you're not paying late, then the first thing that gets funded, I believe, is a type of docketing fee that goes, I think, to the clerks. But our research found that the overwhelming majority of people are late. And when you're 90 days late on a fine or a fee, you're automatically, without any type of judicial intervention, assessed a 30% collections fee. And that becomes priority number one. So if you owed $1,000, now you owe $1,300, and the first $300 that you pay is going to stay with that collections fee.
Okay.
And I think if I can jump in.
Yeah, Dr. Jones, please.
Leah really described the system. If people are paying, that's how it works. But one of the things that we found out in our report was that over half the cases we observed had no payments made whatsoever. And in fact, if noting the late fee, 2/3 of cases we saw had a late fee applied. So, if folks who never made a payment, even some of the folks who were making payments would fall behind pretty regularly and get hit with that late fee. And so what that ultimately meant for the Jefferson County Circuit Court was that they were collecting 25 cents to every dollar that they were assessing, which in terms of efficiency is really inefficient. I mean, if we compare that to other types of tax revenues, states and the federal government tend to collect 80 to 90 cents for every dollar in income taxes that are assessed. Property taxes, you're looking at 90 to 95% of all property taxes being paid. And so 25 cents to a dollar, 25%, is a pretty low collection rate. Now, we were able to observe this over several years. We were able to observe this prior to COVID and a lot of the kind of challenges that we would think came with COVID. And so really it showed us a system that in the best case when people are paying, a lot of times they still fall behind and get hit with that late fee. And even in cases where they are paying, those dollars really aren't going to some of those types of funds that we would typically expect or maybe want to fund certain parts of our judicial system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to talk for a second about who's not getting paid. Because, again, I do a lot of work talking with people who are impacted by the justice system and the legal system. And that includes, people who may have been adjudicated guilty of crimes, but also crime victims, and of course, judges and prosecutors and attorneys. And everybody really is uniformly concerned about victims, right? We want to make sure that crime victims have what they need to recover and move on, whatever that may be. But what we found is that the way the default priority system allocates money, restitution is actually the last thing that gets paid. So, going back to what Pete said about how most of the time people don't pay, well, most of the time people don't pay anything, but the other most of the time they don't finish paying. Since restitution is the last thing to receive a cent, that means that victims who are owed money are very unlikely to actually see any money come in. So that means if I steal your notebook and the court, convicts me of a felony, and then I'm also assessed, $4 for the notebook on top of $100 of fines and fees, until I pay $100, which is allocated to all of these different funds, and that can be anything from clerk fees that go to the court, there's money that goes to the general fund, there's money that goes to the American Village at Montevallo, a lot of money goes to all different kinds of state functions. Until I've paid that $100, that was my fine and fee assessment, I better pay that, because only until I get to $101 will you start getting reimbursed for this notebook that I stole.
Wow. That's surprising. And I remember reading that as part of the report, is that the victims, which you would think would be pretty top priority in terms of who's going to get the restitution or whatever, toward the end, toward the last at the trough, and that seems kind of backward in my mind. And we were just talking with the district attorneys. They have a funding problem too, in terms of a lot of their funding comes from fees and fines and things like that, creating kind of a perverse incentive. So we're talking about maybe solutions. How do we get beyond this? What's a better way to do it? And Dr. Jones, let me go to you, because I'm thinking that y'all might observe other states and other jurisdictions and maybe have some best practices for how we can fix all this.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about conceptually, right? User fees are important funds for ways to raise revenue for the government. If you want to go hunt, you need a hunting license, right? It makes sense for us to charge a user fee for that. There are other places, though, where it doesn't make sense to charge a user fee, and that's really for services that we all use. And for our criminal justice system, we're represented. The public is represented by prosecutors, and the court is in charge of administrating a fair and just system for everyone who lives in Alabama, everyone who lives in the United States, and in many ways, it's kind of strange that we decided let's go ahead and fund this by user fees. Especially given that a lot of folks involved in the criminal justice system may not have the means to pay those. And right, we see this with our data that over half of the cases have no payment made for it. So in many ways, just conceptually thinking about this, user fees may not be the right way to fund courts, because it is this kind of system that we all rely on. We all want it to be there.
Absolutely.
If we become a victim of a crime. And so, I really, for all of the actors involved, whether it be judges or prosecutors, defense attorneys, we really would expect and hope that funding's there. And so other states really have started maybe leaning back on the general fund to say, we don't want to create these incentives for different actors in the system, whether they be prosecutors or judges, to have to self-fund, because that can lead to some really big policy problems.
Sure.
We've certainly seen those across Alabama at times. And so that's one of the best practices is, perhaps funding all of the user fees that we're collecting back into the general fund, and then letting the legislature go in and fund those important aspects of our criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. So the clerks, the courts, the prosecutors themselves. That's certainly one thing that we can think about. There's, I think, some administrative things that Leah and I have talked about, and Leah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Leah. So you said that basically the cascading funding model is basically a rule from the administrative office of the court. So I'm assuming that would be one way to change it. But couldn't legislation change this too? How do we go about just on the disbursement? We'll leave the funding model alone.
Right.
But the disbursement model, because I think the fact that victims are coming last, I think most people are probably surprised by that. How would the state go about changing that?
So if I could wave a magic wand, today, I would move restitution that's owed to victims to number one. There's not restitution in every case, and not every case is a theft case, or there's not always a situation where someone who was a victim is owed money. Okay. But when that happens, which I think is about 25% of cases, but I could be wrong, at least of the cases we looked at, they should be number one on the list. The first dollars that come in should go to them until they are made whole again financially. But then, looking at the rest of the system, I think the most responsible thing to do is really start counting the money, because prosecutors, for instance, rely very heavily on fines and fees. So that 30% I talked about that people are assessed when they're 90 days late, that money, when it comes in, is split 75%, 25% between the district attorney and the clerk. And that puts district attorneys in a position of having to basically search other people's couch cushions for spare change, right? We know that most people who are convicted of crimes don't have much money. And the way I say we know that is because we actually merged our court data with census data, and we were able to see that overwhelmingly money is owed in neighborhoods where the median incomes are very low. So we're expecting people who don't have much money to fund essential government systems like prosecutors. We know prosecutors have been frustrated by this in the past. I mean, during COVID, I remember them talking about an enormous funding shortfall because people weren't paying fines and fees. The courts were closed. People's incomes became radically constricted in those first few months of the pandemic. And the DAs were like, how are we gonna keep doing our jobs? We have to still prosecute cases, but our budget comes and relies on these fines and fees. The same thing is happening in Limestone County. Recently, we heard the DA there saying, the population here has exploded. I can't keep up. And I think his county commission said, well, why don't you add another court cost? That won't work, because most of the money just doesn't come in when it's assessed. So again, thinking about what reform looks like, we need to look at what money is being brought in now and all of the statutes, some of which are local, some of which are statewide, that authorize these assessments, and really have kind of a hard conversation about what is being brought in now through what means and where it's going. And then I think the next step after that, once we know who would win and who would lose, would be to rationalize the system. And I hope send all money except restitution to the state general fund to be allocated like any other public money.
Well, we're out of time, but it's a great conversation. I'm glad that we started it here. And I want to have y'all back to maybe continue the conversation because, like you said, maybe let's count the money first, and then let's figure out maybe some solutions. But Dr. Jones, Leah, thank y'all so much for coming on the show, and look forward to having you back on again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We'll be right back.
Since 1997, Alabama Public Television has provided programs, services, and resources to child care professionals, teachers, and parents. Visit aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Othni Lathram, Director of the Legislative Services Agency. Othni, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here, Todd.
Well, I wanted to have you on because I read Ralph Chapaco's story in the Alabama Reflector about kind of an update on the new State House. I mean, I walk by it every day, the construction that's going on. They're making a lot of progress. It just seems to be going up so fast. So can you kind of give us an update on where we are with this really exciting new project?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's fun to walk past there, and it's hard not to lose a couple of minutes looking at those cranes.
Right,
yeah. So things are going really, really well. Obviously, we're very excited. We've got a great partnership with RSA, who's overseeing the process, and it really is helpful to have a team that's been through this a bunch of times before, and they know how to keep it on schedule. And to date, we're roughly on schedule and slightly ahead of budget. A couple of bid packages, major bid packages out right now. So, in the next 30 days, we'll even know more kind of where we're at. But, full expectation that we're going to be functional for the organizational session January of 2027 and moving in, well ahead of there to be able to make that happen and happy with the progress.
Right. We talked about that a little bit before because the construction will probably be finished well before then. But it takes a lot to actually move into the building, considering everything that goes into, it's not just an office building. This is a legislative chamber, 2 chambers. I mean, all the electronics, all the voting mechanisms, and it's got to be working, pristinely when we move in. So that takes a lot of time.
Well, it does. Todd, just thinking about, the voting systems. The House obviously has voting boards where you track live how members are voting in real time. That's a pretty significant investment and a lot of technical glitches to work out. And while the Senate does voice voting, they have all of that built in behind the scenes as well. When the secretary's calling the roll, there's a lot of mechanics on the back end of that dais that keep track of everything. Additionally, we want to beef up our streaming capabilities, both for the chambers and for all of the committee rooms. And so you're right, there's a lot of IT to get installed to make sure that we've got it right and have plenty of time to test it. And then on top of that, you've got 140 member offices to get set up, a lot of spaces to get furnished, about 200, plus full-time employees in this building year-round that have to get moved over there. So there's a lot once kind of the building looks done before we're actually ready for session and to get going.
So do you think it's like, okay, sine die 2026. Of course, they want to get out of here anyway to go campaign. And then it's like, okay, let's pray for no specials, and then we start moving in. Is that kind of how it works?
That's exactly how it works, right? Obviously, a special session in those intervening months would be very interesting, but legislative staff knows how to get things done, and we'll figure out a way to work around that if it happens.
You mentioned the costs, and I thought that was an interesting part of Ralph's reporting because we're sensitive about that. We've had this prison construction situation. We have inflation. We have a lot of supply issues. You mentioned that the costs are what they expected to be. That seems like really good news in this environment.
It is really good news, Todd, and I think it's a real credit to, again, the RSA team that's overseeing this, as well as our architects. I think our architects from day one understood that the priorities of what we were doing with the building, and have designed a building that kind of had the right balance of keeping functionality and cost in perspective. Total project, I think we've talked about this before some. Total project's about $400 million budget, but that includes the building of a parking deck, the tearing down of this current building, and the creation of some green space between the new State House and the Capitol. RSA's estimate on the construction of the new building's been about $325 million from the beginning, and so far we're coming in a little bit below of where we should be at this percentage of completion. And again, with these current packages out, we'll know a lot more in about 30 more days. But the budget looks good, and it looks like our projections were on track.
I know lawmakers will be very happy to hear that with everything going on in the economy and in the country. I joked before that maybe a fundraising idea would be to sell opportunities to loose the wrecking ball for this building. I'd sign up. I might pay a couple $100 for that. That's one idea. You mentioned functionality. What are some things we can expect, whether you're a constituent coming to involve yourself in state government, watch the process, whether you're a lawmaker, whether you're a lobbyist, us in the media? What are some features of this new building that will be an improvement over the current State House?
Well, first and foremost, it's going to be easier for people to get in and circulate. This building obviously was originally an office building, and we've made it work for about 40 years, but as you know, on a session day, it's pretty hard to get through the hallways.
Right.
So from the very first thing when you walk in, you're going to notice that it's built more for public circulation. Nice centralized staircase, elevator lobbies, getting you between all the spaces that you need to get to. Second, all the committee spaces will be bigger. In this building, we really only have one major committee room where if you've got that serious issue that's going to have a big public hearing that can be used, and that's room 200. And that room also has to be used for, caucus lunches and a whole host of other events.
And it's relatively new. It's only been there 10 years or so.
That's exactly right. And pre, that time we had nothing like that room. And so we're going to have a joint committee room that's going to have theater style seating for more than 200 members of the public to participate in those major hearings of that type. Each chamber is going to have a committee room almost as big as room 200, but again, dedicated only to committee meetings. Each body is going to have a slightly smaller committee room, but also bigger than anything in this building. And then there's going to be a whole series of committee rooms, kind of similar to the one on the 8th floor here, with even a little bit, about 125% of that square footage and footprint. So even more public access. So our number 2 committee room in this building is going to be about the size of the rank and file committee rooms in the new building.
That's really important, because that's one of the big problems with the current space is if there is a big committee, because look, that's where the action happens, that's where public hearing happens, that's how, if you want to speak out on a bill, you do it in committee, right? We've got some footage here of the construction going on.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic, yeah.
It's exciting, like you said, walking by every day, and we're excited about our space. We're going to have a new studio in that building. We got a lot of work to do on that, but yeah, they have really been just putting those columns up, those pilings, and now I think they're on almost to the 3rd floor. So
yeah, and Todd, as you look at that, you mentioned the columns, and you see those major columns that are necessary to support a building of that size. Well, in this building, those columns run right through the middle of the House chamber, for instance.
Right.
And so you have members who can't really see what's happening up in the well on debate, or see the speaker presiding over the body, and that spills into the galleries as well. And so when you're kind of designing from paper and then the ground up, you're able to put those major columns in spaces where they're not going to obstruct members or public view. And so I mean, those are some of the things that just being able to design from scratch get you that we weren't able to have in this building.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, I know the House is going to really appreciate that. But yeah, the committee rooms, I mean, that's going to be a major improvement. I also think it's interesting that the House and Senate are going to be on the same floor. Like right now, House is on 5, their gallery is on 6, Senate's on 7, their gallery is on 8. So really, you've got to, let's say you're a lobbyist or somebody that's just involved, you've got to choose, okay, do I go to the House or do I go to the Senate? And you got to climb the stairs. It's going to be on the same floor with a common lobby in between, I suppose.
That's right. And if you look at the old Capitol, of course, the old Capitol's that way. And of course, most state capitals and the U.S. Capitol are kind of built in that in that kind of a structure. And when we came to this building, the upper chamber tag for the Senate took kind of a literal meaning as well, just because the building again dictated that, right? Having to retrofit an existing building, and there was no space to put those two chambers on the same floor. But that is going to be a very nice feature in the new building, and it also make, I think, communication between members of the two bodies a little bit easier, right? They'll be able to cross over into each other's chambers a little bit easier. As you said, folks who are up in the galleries are going to be able to go from one gallery to the other in an easier way. So hopefully, again, that kind of demonstrates the focus on public access, public use, and functionality.
By all accounts, you and your staff do a tremendous job. And everybody says that, Republicans, Democrats, especially leadership. So you're to be commended for that. And we look forward to having you back on maybe when the session starts, and we'll go through some of this again.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, we've got a really good team, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
You do. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.